Down some of the most epic smartphone fails ever, starting off pretty bad, but ending up in complete disaster. Number 10 is the Galaxy Fold, for which all hell broke loose as Samsung's revolutionary smartphone started breaking before it had even reached consumers. There was later a teardown by iFixit, which showed a whole number of design vulnerabilities, like the gap in the screen bezel or the hinge when the phone is folded up, which would both give clear room for dirt to get trapped in. An even bigger issue, though, came from reviewers peeling off what looked like the embedded screen protector, but what was actually part of the display structure. Here's the thing, if a polymer film shouldn't be taken off a device, then it should be designed so that it can't be taken off the device. This is a solid 3 out of 10 fail right here, saved in part just because it was caught before the product actually reached consumers. The Facebook phone, also known as the HTC First, was the first phone in the world to use Facebook Home.
फोर्टनाइट जब तक खेलूँगा क्योंकि बग आ रहा है टेंशन गेमिंग के
A heavy software skin over Android. This was a mid-range phone built for the masses. Both Facebook and HTC thought that this could be huge. And credit where due, Facebook Home itself wasn't terrible. It was where the Facebook chat heads that you're probably used to now were actually introduced, and you could see all your Facebook notifications all over your lock screen. But it did so poorly that within a month of being on sale, AT&T dropped its on-contract price from $99 to 99 cents. The main reason being that the whole thing was just a bit underwhelming. Where be huge. And credit where due, Facebook Home itself software is the but just because it was caught first was the first phone in the world to use Facebook Home, a heavy software skin over Android. This was a mid-range phone built for the masses. Both Facebook and HTC thought that this could be huge. And credit where due, Facebook Home itself wasn't terrible. It was where the Facebook chat heads that you're probably used to now were actually introduced, and you could see all your Facebook notifications all over your lock screen. But it did so poorly that within a month of being on sale, AT&T dropped its on-contract price from $99 to 99 cents. The main reason being that the whole thing was just a bit underwhelming. Whilst it was a fresh new look compared to stock Android, a lot of its features could be downloaded on other Android phones, which had, frankly speaking, better hardware. So this one's also with the purpose of even $2,000. I'm talking devices that went all the way up to $50,000. The idea behind Virtue was to market phones as fashion accessories, to kind of separate themselves from all these other smartphones that were competing on specifications and to instead try to compete on materials and craftsmanship. They said that if people can pay $20,000 for a watch, then why not on a mobile phone? And to be clear, this in itself was not the problem. I actually think they had a pretty good point. The problem came because whilst these guys were out there hand-making smartphones, they were up against companies like Samsung with the ability to mass produce. And so Virtue was always behind the curve. By the time Virtue had released a phone, it was already a whole year behind in
इतनी जल्दी हो भी गया अच्छा नहीं हो रहा है अभी लॉगिन भी कर लेते हैं फिर लॉगिन विद गूगल और तब तक हम एपिक गेम्स बाबा लॉगिन विद गूगल जल्दी आ जा भाई इतनी सारी चीज़ें हो रही हैं साइन अप तेरे तेज तो ये है मतलब पहले हो गया पहले जैसे खोला था पूरा लोड आ जाए तो ठीक है क्या अबे क्या है यार चलो जी फोटा खोल लेते हैं
specs, and when people are spending 50k on a phone,
मोनेटाइज हो गया ना मैं स्ट्राइक लगा देना कॉपी
having the latest components is a minimum requirement. It wasn't long before the company was seriously in debt and then had to be shut down. So I'm going to give this a 4 out of 10 fail rating. Pretty disastrous outcome, but at the same time, it wasn't hugely surprising. Google's Project I.A.A.N was a truly exciting prospect. We're talking about a completely modular phone that people could customize based on their needs. Those on a budget could pick and choose the features that were important to them, like maybe a large battery, and enthusiasts could go all out and build the phone of their dreams. Plus, it would massively reduce the cost of upgrading. Instead of swapping your whole phone out, you could literally just swap the parts you wanted to change. And there's also an environmental benefit, as fewer devices would then be thrown away. So this kind of sounds amazing, but there were just too many problems with it. The main one boiling down to complexity. Imagine this: Google is offering people essentially a frame on top of which consumers can pick and choose the parts that they want. And that part's fine, but what if different consumers want different sized phones? Does Google then offer That part's fine, but what if different consumers want different sized the parts that they want? And that part's fine, but what if different consumers want different sized phones? Does Google then offer 5 different sizes of frames and then separate sized versions of every single component to go with them? You've also got to bear in mind that because this frame has got to be both future-proofed and at least able to support high-end components, if you were out there just trying to build a cheap phone, then chances are the body itself would end up costing just as much, if not more, as the rest of your components. So Project I.A.A.N is also getting a 4 out of 10. It's a pretty big fail, but at the same time, it started and ended as a dream. There was never really a final product announced. Number 6 is from Microsoft, who invested about 2 years and $1 billion in what ended up becoming the Kin-1. The central concept here was Loop, a home screen that collected all your different social media feeds into one place. The idea was decent, and to be fair, the phone was also hitting at a good time. It was right at the start of this social media revolution. But the problem was that it's almost comical how many features were missing. The feeds would only update once every 15 minutes, the phone had no app store, and you couldn't even use any messaging applications. Kind of ironic for a social media-centric phone. For a company like Microsoft to have taken this much of a misstep, and for it to have costed them so much, is a pretty big fail in my books. So that's a 5 out of 10. Let me tell you something that very rarely works. Companies that have nothing to do with smartphones suddenly jumping in and trying to build a flagship. The red Hydrogen One is a shining example of this. It comes from a company that specializes in Hollywood cinema cameras. It started off as an exciting idea with an apparent holographic display and ultra high-end modular camera system. But it kind of feels like Red was so focused on trying to stand out that they kind of forgot why most phones are built the way they are. And so the Hydrogen One ended up being a polar opposite to all of them, and not in a good way. They completely skipped over the trends of having a vivid OLED display, anything close to slim bezels, or just generally having a pocketable phone that was reasonably sized in your hand. Add to this that the device was delayed twice due to manufacturing problems, and this was one messy situation. So 6 out of 10 for this one. Number 4 is the BlackBerry Storm from 2008, and we're talking about a device here that has been described as the worst smartphone ever. That's quite the title. And part of what makes this such a miserable failure is just how much there was going for it. The Storm boasted a lot of the same features of the iPhone that it was going up against, but with a clickable touchscreen display and the company's famously good messaging services. And yet, the experience on the phone was literally awful. It used pretty much the same operating system as the previous non-touchscreen BlackBerries, and so it was nowhere near as polished as iOS that was made for this. Ironically, coming from BlackBerry, the typing sucked too. It was ruined by a combination of lag and only being able to touch one key at a time. So this number 3. Welcome to the Freedom 251, a smartphone by the company ringing bells, which went on sale in India for around $4. You read that right, $4, the price of a cup of coffee for many people. As you might have guessed then, this thing pretty much destroyed the internet for a bit, raking in almost 50 million pre-registrations in the first week. I'm pretty sure that's some sort of record, but how many of those 50 million actually ended up getting delivered? Well, from the reports, it's looking somewhere between 65,000 and 5,000. And then, because the managing director wasn't fulfilling his orders, had declined to offer a refund, and more out again now, if everyone had it at enough, especially the 6 Plus, were just not as resistant. So essentially, the iPhone out of 10, and especially the 6 Plus, were just not as resistant to bending as they should have been. There was a particular point in the chassis on which, if pressure was applied, the device would deform. On one hand, this was blown out of proportion.
I mean, कोई वैसे एक बात है जो लोग करते हैं कि भाई मोबाइल को दबा के मोड़ के, ऑब्वियसली इसके लिए नहीं बनाया गया कि आप फुल जान लगा के करके मोड़ो। खैर, लेकिन जो लोग दिखाते हैं वो तो फिर भी बाकी स्ट्रॉन्ग होते, लेकिन आईफोन 6 जो था इतना ट्रैश था, वो तो बिल्कुल ही आसानी से आराम कोई बच्चा भी आराम से ना कर सकता था, मोड़ सकता था, इतना
A didn't have a case and was initial rumors became resolved and then.
चलो थोड़ा सा पानी पी लेता हूँ मैं, फिर इसके बाद फोर्टनाइट। और मैं ये रिकमेंड करूँगा कि ना जो है स्ट्रीम मेरी फुल हाई क्वालिटी में देखना। हाई क्वालिटी वो इतनी जल्दी हो रही है, ये मुझे तो लगता है मैं एक भी फोर्टनाइट गेम नहीं खेल पाऊँगा। Tears. Oh shit. Really? ये तो चेंज करें हम। पर लग जाए मैच, देख भी नहीं रहा यार ऐसे ही। लॉन्ग लास्टिंग battery. Oh, dude. Oh, okay. Okay. Yup. I did it. बोला ही था, टीओ नहीं था। ओके ओके, ठीक है, मैंने कहा टीममेट्स नहीं है, क्या आ गया। Yeah. I don't care about trash है। थोड़ी सी हम प्रैक्टिस कर लेते हैं। यार इतना आला लग रहा है, डैम। ऐसा करता हूँ, इसको एंड करता हूँ, दोबारा खेलता हूँ। क्या बकवास। चलो छोड़ो यार, रन नहीं करते, यही चलाते हैं। फोर्टनाइट खेलेंगे, कल कर लेंगे यार। पबजी दिन नहीं कर रहा, फोर्टनाइट खोल लेना। पबजी खुद ही एक्साइट नहीं कर रहा है। ये क्या आप कर रहे होते ना